So yeah, let's start tonight's event by acknowledging that the land that a lot of us on the Zoom call are on is unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and that the island of Newfoundland is the homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuavut and the Inuit of Nitisinaan as the original people of Labrador. This acknowledgement is a commitment we practice in action, striving for respectful relationships with all the people on Turtle Island. So tonight we have a really interesting map making themed event with FARR artist in resident Evelyn Roitner. Did I say that right? Cool. And special guest James Knott. And feel free to be working on your maps now or any other project that you have at hand. So for those of you who don't know Evelyn and James, Evelyn is an emerging multidisciplinary artist and illustrator, originally from Aurora, Ontario. She's now based in St. John's, Newfoundland. In 2016, she graduated from OCAD University with a Bachelor of Design in illustration. Through traditional and digital mediums, she explores themes of identity, storytelling, place, and personal mythologies. And James Knott is an emerging Toronto-based artist who received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Integrated Media from OCAD University. Their performance-based practice combines theater, video, and audio art to create an immersive and emotionally resonant experience for the viewer. Currently, their practice looks to house personal narratives and queer experiences through self-mythologizing and auto-iconographic aestheticism. Before James and Evelyn dive into some discussion about their research and areas of interest, Evelyn will be showing us some images and talking about the work she's been making during her residency. And later on, Evelyn will be explaining the prompt in some more depth, and that's the prompt that you should have received in the email with this link in it. And from there, we can keep chatting and while working on our map making. So, that being said, I can hand it off to you, Evelyn.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro. And thanks to Eastern Edge for having me with this Maker's Night. I'm pretty excited. So yeah, I would like to share my screen. Oh, one moment. Okay. Can everybody see that? That's looking all right. Some clouds and some houses. Okay. So, so this project started, well, it started in June, but the time frame I'm working with was, March to June, when things started shutting down, or shut down quite quickly. Mid-March, there's not much else to do, so I started walking every day, no matter the weather, really. And it was a good way to get exercise and fresh air. But as I walked, I started noticing a lot more. I noticed that I wasn't as familiar as I thought I was with the neighborhood that I was in for the past year and a half. And just going down the streets that you don't need to go down unless you live there, kind of all the streets that are places and like crescents and stuff, right? So from that, I was inspired to make some work about it. I wasn't really sure what I was gonna make, and I talked to James, and I was saying I wanted to make work about this walking, and James had a great response, which was to spend about 15 minutes going back into university notes for an art history class, and to find me this idea of the Situationist international movement. Oh, I should be I should be going along here. Sorry. So this is my walking. But anyhow, just things you notice. Look at that gas price. Oh, 82. All that ice, all the snow. Anyhow, Situationist International were, I'll get into it a bit later, but it's essentially they sort of made up this idea of psychogeography, which is to say it's sort of the study of geography, but with an emphasis on emotion and memory and things to do with like individuals. And so with that lens, I started looking at maps and just different imagery that I remember from the walks and a lot of photos that I took. I didn't take nearly as many if I knew I was going to do this project, but I delved into some collage painting, and I thought this kind of format would sort of help convey the emotions and the sort of movement and drifting that happens. So I wonder if I should talk more, or should I start a conversation with James? I guess I keep going. Sorry. This was an interesting image I found on the heritage.nf.ca. It's a city limit. City limits sort of. It's a sign near Mundy Pond in the 70s, and I sort of liked that, and it calls back to when I was researching. I could not really find a map of this area here, so I had to use Google. So an older map, I mean, of St. John's, it kind of cuts off right before Mundy Pond. It wasn't quite part of the city anyhow, so they didn't bother mapping it, or maybe there was nothing developed, which there wasn't much. So that was an interesting discovery there, that maps sort of show what people want to see, the people in power, and how subjective they are, and sort of went into that direction. Here's an old map of Newfoundland. It's sort of interesting because south is at the top. It's not a north top. So if you see like over on the left-hand side, St. John's is somewhere in there. Sort of, you can sort of see the rough shapes, and I just sort of liked that, playing with orientation of news, north, south, east, west. And here's another one upside down. It sort of looks like a whale, and it's illustrated as well, and it has to do more with fishing, and so that was their main concern. Just interesting maps. And move me. Whoop. Oh my. The New Yorker one is always good. I enjoy that illustration, and I won't be able to move it, but it's sort of just this idea of perspective in map making, so New York is like the majority of the image, Hudson River, and then you get a tiny sliver of Jersey, and then it keeps going like that until the Pacific Ocean, and you see in the distance there's Japan, China, and Russia. So this sort of very subjective way of looking at things. Here's an image of that I just found on Newfoundland, and just sort of to show like that, depending on the area, it could be important or not for these companies like Google to take a good satellite photo. Sometimes if it's low population or whatever, it's low res, or it's just covered like this completely. So, you know, you zoom in and it's, the clouds are in the way. And just interesting Google like morphing with the images. I really liked that. And just how you can see the sky in a Google sort of street view, and this zoom that sort of happens. So from there, all those things, I guess, combined, and I started making work based mostly on my own photographs and using collage or just paint, like this one. This one was, I used some of the Google images to sort of to use as reference, or just my own photos, like this one. This one was really like amalgamations where I really tried to combine different aspects of my walks, sort of more hiking things, or, and then on the other side, more of a graveyard sort of walk. And in the center is this gravestone that is beautifully covered in lichen. And then the butterflies just kind of make it even more surreal. This one, I wanted to focus on like the topography, especially looking at water, and how sometimes when you're looking at maps, you don't really, that's not what you're paying attention to usually. You're trying to wayfind. So this was an interesting, I tried to cut out sort of the waterways and skew the perspective so it's south facing is up and that kind of thing. And then on this one, just incorporating the map into the place itself. And just this one is sort of a very expressive look at a scene. I tried to incorporate too, like the idea of a maze, and just sort of the like circles, things like that. Yeah, and so that brings us to psychogeography and the ideas behind that. And while I didn't quite go into psychogeography in the sense of the city, I was really kind of in the suburbs. I thought it was an interesting starting point anyhow, and I thought maybe we could use that tonight for our Maker's Night and just sort of look at that way of making maps and looking at our surroundings and thinking about how we move and things like that. Yeah, so I'd like to open it up a little bit because I'd like to hear other people too. Here's I guess I'll keep going until the end, and then I'll open it up for sure. Sorry. So this is a great example, I thought, of these this kind of psychogeography. It's part of a larger map, but this is a part, like a zoom into sort of the smells, the textures, and the sounds, and how it made people feel, like if it was a nice texture, you know, not so great. And they sort of mapped everything to do with the senses and then put it on their big map of the walk around the school campus. This one's just a sweet, sort of whimsical way. 1 city, 5 hours, Paris, it says. And it just sort of has little illustrations to do with this person's walk around Paris. And then it sort of incorporates the La Seine, the River Seine. This one is Rio de Janeiro, and I love just like the collage of this one. This one is an interesting one where this artist sort of interviewed a whole bunch of people about their favorite parts of Minneapolis, and then proceeded to sort of put it all together in this big watercolor map, and all the writing, I think, has to do with those stories that were told to that artist. I thought that was beautiful, and it looks really cute. Really nice. So for the prompt, I was hoping we would look at a walk or a route that we've walked and try to map that. And now it can be any kind of route. It can be like the route from your seat to the fridge, or it can be something around the neighborhood. It can be one where you go to work, go to the bus, but anything where you walk. And then just think of the emotions surrounding that, or more like the sights, smells, and colors that sort of pop into your mind. And then you can try to maybe make your own version of a map. And it does not have to be accurate, and it can be, but it's that idea of just sort of map making in your own way. So here I sort of did the prompt where I sort of tried to remember all the places I had been in the neighborhoods that I was in. And I feel like I was doing it quite accurately, right? But then you start getting into it, and then you realize, oh no, that's not where that is. It should be more up here. But then I just kept building on it, and came up with this kind of thing. And I used some tape, which I thought was fun, and just sort of looks like that. I sort of see a face in there, but just sort of an interesting way to map out different things. And you can add illustrations, you can write things, but I thought that might be an interesting prompt. And otherwise you can do whatever you like, because it's just us hanging out. So, thanks. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Nice to see all the faces again. Sorry. So yeah, so does anybody have a question about the prompt first? Any questions at all?
I'm wondering, I'm really curious about this concept of psychogeography, and could you tell us a little more about its history, and or any readings or ideas that you've come across in your research?
Sure, yeah. So it was created, the concept was sort of brought about by Guy Debord, a French artist and poet and writer. And he wrote this famous book, The Society of the Spectacle. But his idea on psychogeography, like I said, was this idea of like tracking the urban space, or documenting it through a person's emotions or experiences. And he has this, the map there I was showing. Oh, sorry. I'll go back to the PowerPoint in a second here. So that one is Guy Debord. It's one of the most famous pictures of that, but it's sort of, I won't pretend to really understand the piece itself, but I think it is chopping up Paris, which was in, I think, the middle of another like urban planning, like a renewal. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but and so he was just sort of linking different places and chopping up the map and creating space where there wasn't space, maybe, or relationships in the map that had to do with, I think, himself. So that was, I think, the idea there. And like I said, I didn't quite go situationist, just because it was a good starting point, and it had that kind of map is already done. So I didn't really feel like I was, I guess the idea also was cities versus sort of, I was more in a suburban area, which sort of felt different in terms of like the suburbs were great because for walking, because I didn't really need to go anywhere. So, but for the city, it's kind of meant a little bit more for pedestrians. They also are tied into, the situationists were also tied into this idea of the of dérive, which is like drifting, but also they had to do with, that idea was also different. I didn't quite use it either, but it was interesting because you would sort of change something to change the meaning. So you'd alter something or alter it to interrupt the meaning behind that. So there were ads that they kind of pasted over and like painted over to make it a different thing, a different meaning, and that kind of thing. So that was interesting. But I liked the idea of dérive in the word in itself, because that's what I felt like I was doing, just sort of drifting on foot, just going wherever. Yeah.
And James, did you like, is this an area of research that you were really interested in too? And do you guys kind of?
No, it was the darndest thing. it was the darndest thing. Evelyn was like, I'm thinking of doing this project where I've been walking a lot, and I've been like thinking about my walks. And I've been like, I'm like documenting my walks. And I was like, oh, and then she was like, what? And I was like, and I had like several seizures, and I was like ripping through my bookshelves, and it was like, it's here. And then she was like, what's here? And it was like, textbook number 1. No, it's not in this one. Textbook number 2. And I was going through my hard drives because I knew that I didn't remember what it was. I didn't remember that it was Psychogeography. I remember that vaguely, that when I took a history of modern art class, there was one module that was on Society of Spectacle and The Situation is International. And I remember that specifically because it was the most boring one, and I completely fell asleep. So when I was writing my final exam notes, I was like, I don't know what this is. I don't know her. I don't talk to her. I've never met her. So that much stuck into my head. And when I finally found the reference, it was in my final exam notes, tucked to the bottom. So I just sort of passed it along, even though I didn't really know too much about it, aside from like what you can maybe extrapolate on the surface level of like, okay, psychogeography, or you learn about like Flaneur and like dérive when you're like learning about like impressionism, for instance. So it's like, that's a concept that like you can carry over and apply to this like other thing that like you maybe prescribe meaning to when you don't know it. So like the bulk of everything that we learned today is purely on Ev's behalf. Although I did reference, it's funny, I found that lecture so boring, but I ended up referencing Society of Spectacle in my thesis. Don't pay attention in class is the lesson of the day, because that is what sticks with you more than what you studied.
And it's funny because I tried to read that. I found the Society of the Spectacle in the Eastern Edge
really weirdly, because it's like or I don't know if the entire book is like this, but it's like point form and like numbered. So like instead of it being like a traditional like essay where it's like, this is my theory and I'm going to tell you about Kant and Foucault and all of these other things. It's very much like, number 1, you are useless. Number 2, look in a mirror and you'll realize that you're useless.
It is kind of like that, where I tried to really go into it because I knew this artist had to do with situationists.
Yeah.
But it was really a little bit, there was a barrier there, and it was very like Marxist theory and things like that, so it wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I was trying to get into it, but yeah, I agree, it was a little bit hard to do because of the format.
But interesting in a sense, because you don't usually come across, I guess it just sort of speaks to like the movement itself, and that it was very like, countercultural, very youth cultural, very postmodern, And then it was like, I'm going to write a thesis, but it's going to be, or maybe that's also more traditional too, because that's reminding me of like, I forget what the monk's name, but the guy who wrote like his 95 theses. And
yeah,
then he,
Luther, right?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
invented like Protestantism because he was like, I'm tired of you Catholics like sucking each other off behind the podium. I know. Yes, that's what happened, I think.
That's not what he said.
That's exactly what he said. That's exactly what he said, because I was there. And I was thinking,
yeah.
But yeah. Although
Yeah.
you brought up something
Those
too
are-
when you, sorry, because you were
go
telling
ahead.
me, you were like, I brought this reference to this project, but like I found a hard time connecting it to my project. But then you were also talking about how like there's also like been like feminist critiques of the movement because it was like very exclusionary of like women, and how like women just inherently wouldn't be able to drift.
Yeah.
And
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you want
And
to talk
the
about that, or
yeah, absolutely.
or do you not want to get political?
Oh
No.
no. Yeah, the flaneur, the idea of this man, it's always a man sort of drifting in the city and, you know, letting things wash over him and just like taking the city in and experiencing it. And it was funny because I came across this article about a book that I should read called Flaneurs, which is kind of just the feminine version of that word. And it was just this argument for a woman flaneur that a lot of scholars kind of dismissed because they thought women in the 18th century, or sorry, in the 19th century, didn't walk the city. They weren't a part of it like the men were, like that kind of thing. So, but she sort of countered it and said, well, of course there's women who walked in the city. A lot of women worked in the city, but maybe it's just be a flaneur in a different way, whereas instead of passively absorbing, women might have to be like over hyper aware of their surroundings because of safety, because of things like the fact that they were women. They had to be aware of surroundings, and but they were still able to experience the city. It was just in a different kind of way. So I thought that was very interesting. Yeah, the flaneurs. And yeah, sort of had that in the back of my mind when walking, and so even though I wasn't necessarily in an urban center, sort of had that vibe of like, you know, being a bit more of the traditional flaneur, but also being aware because you have to be aware just for safety. Yeah, just going out alone on the walks too. Yeah. But also it was interesting too, when I was walking, you'd see a lot of these things in the windows, and it was sort of comforting too. You sort of felt like people were away in their homes and not necessarily out and about. And I don't know why that's comforting, but just to be
Because you were out and about.
Yeah, I felt
like
like
you
I
stay in there because I'm over here.
Yeah, I see you. They had cute, like, I don't know if does this, there was a lot of like faux stained glass painting on the windows that happened a lot in St. John's. Did that happen in Ontario as well? Like, I haven't been anywhere. I don't know anyone. Mom, do you know?
I'm like you, out walking every day because there was nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And that was the neat part. You were always coming across something. It wasn't one thing. Like, people painted their garages in chalk.
Oh.
They had their driveways done in chalk. They had various things. Some people had pegs, wooden signs with a message, and the pegs were all across their lawn. I myself did, I changed it up once in a while, and I had Beanie Babies hanging from the window inside, and three collection of bears hugging each other and balloons that I attached to the ceiling to make it look like they were helium. And so every time they walk by, you know, you did different things like that. And it's true, you do have that sense of, it's heartwarming. It was heartwarming, even if it was, usually it was the messages thanking the essential workers, but sometimes it wasn't. It was just something for you to look at outside of the same hamster in a cage route. Or as you say, Evelyn, you went down streets that you don't, because you don't need to.
Yeah.
Right. So it was different. It was the variety, and it was the fun of, you know, somebody, you know, that people would change it up like I changed it up, or just different ways that they presented their gratitude. And it made you feel like, even hearing bells ring, the church bells ringing, or the school over here, all of a sudden I'm hearing bells. I'm like, that's not something new. It's just, it was blotted out by all the noise. And then there was nobody going anywhere, and you could hear the bells. So it's just, sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
No, never. But that did remind me that, like, one thing that I did notice from my seclusion is that, I mean, I'm in the summers, I usually like to take my dog for a walk, but I'm kind of usually like the only person walking around. But like this year, you know, like looking out my window, like there are tons of people walking constantly, because like Vicky said, like there's nothing else to do, or like there was no way to like exercise the fact that you have a human body. So people in the neighborhood would be walking. And maybe that also has to do with like demographics changing, of like, maybe, you know, there are more people that have moved around that like want to walk. But I just keep thinking, like, this entire year, I'm like, I don't know you. Where did you come from? Where are you? I've never seen you. Who do you think you are? And I'll just shout that from my bedroom window at the passersby.
And walking through the neighborhoods, that's a normal thing for me. And all of a sudden, it was people everywhere. And you out on the street, you know how you had to do your social distancing? So people would be nodding at each other, and, you know, they'd stay on the sidewalk and you go on the street, and thank you, that kind of thing. It was like people everywhere. And I'm serious, I'm in the neighborhood here that I'm out all the time, but people aren't. And now everybody's out.
Yeah, no,
young
same
and
thing.
old. Young and old, yeah. And more people commented. I have a front yard full of Rose of Sharons, and more people call out, I like your garden, I like your flowers, I got a few teapots out there, I like your teapots, you know. And I'm right here in front of my house. I'm ironing fabric, so I wash some fabric, I'm ironing, getting ready to sew. And you see them, they stop and they look, and they're little ones, old ones, not all the time, but it's neat. It's like, you know, before nobody said anything. It's like people, it brought out a kindness. That's just my
community of walkers.
My in small town opinion.
Yeah.
I'll turn my mic off now.
No, that's all right. I'm very sorry. I have to go to the washroom.
Oh, you go to that
I'll be
washroom.
right back.
I feel like all the huggers out there have had a really hard time when running into people that they know. And I've seen, Tangine, are you a hugger? Because I've seen it happen where they're like, oh shit, oh no. And yeah, it's just been a new social mannerisms that we're all kind of picking up and navigating through. And it's been interesting to observe that and be in the middle of it.
Charlotte, I think I've been listening, like silently creeping while working on stuff, like in the background, but everyone keeps saying the word like navigating when it comes to like navigating new social behaviors and conversations and stuff. But it's funny because that completely ties back into the map making and the map idea that Evelyn has had. And I don't know, I really also, Evelyn's in the bathroom, so she can't hear me saying this, but like I really like the idea of navigating different parts of our life, but then translating it back into like this psychogeography based map practice. And we had never heard that term before. Like when we first got the information from Evelyn, we were like, what is psychogeography? This sounds incredible. But the more I think about it, it's like, my work is also super based in my memories of like place and like where I grew up. And is that psychogeography? Have I been doing this all like, so it's interesting to learn more about it and to learn how people are interpreting it for sure.
Well, because I think it's like, I just feel like it's a very like human way of being. I keep joking that I have this essay that I'm just never going to write, even though I keep meaning to write it. But, you know, coming from like a film and video background, I think it's interesting that like when the majority of people sort of like talk about like objective, like human experience, it seems more like a stage play where it's like, you know, your perspective is like everything is there and the things are there and you observe them. But I don't actually think that's true. I think that perspective is actually much more like montage, where like actually like our biology is enacting a very interesting series of cuts, whether that be like your physical geography, if I, you know, blink, or if I decide to look over there, or pan, or like focus on a specific subject or shift my focus, or even like mentally, where it's like, you know, I could be staring out the window at a bus and then like thinking about like that embarrassing moment that I did in grade 5, or I might be like looking at like my reflection in the window and then the reflection of the man over there, and then like something else will happen, or I might be like listening to a specific piece of music, but then I'm also being soundtracked by like the diegetic sound of like, oh, that's an interesting conversation. I'm just gonna sneak a little peek at like who was stealing biscuits at the PTA meeting. And, you know, I feel like that's just much more accurate to me, in my opinion, about human perspective, where it's actually about the shift and about like what you project and like what you decide to carry over, as opposed to like this like objective view. And I think that's the same thing with like psychogeography, where it's like we have this view of like place and like things and like architecture as like the thing that exists, but actually, you know, they're also just projections. And, you know, like my perspective from interacting with a monument or a building or like a space or like a pathway is going to be infinitely different than the last time I did it, let alone all the other times that other people were doing it.
I just sort of came in midway there, but it all sounded
I was just
good.
describing what you were doing in the bathroom. That's all.
There's a man being reflected, all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna start doing a bit of the map making. I just went on a walk of my new neighborhood just today earlier, and I'm gonna try and remember where I went. It's not gonna be easy. There was all sorts of things happening, but I'm gonna try and do this loop in pencil.
Evelyn, I'm curious, when people say map, like I tend to think of like just like top down looking at a grid or like lines, and some people maybe think like satellite view, and some people think of it from like their walking perspective, which I feel like is a lot of how your art has been presented, like through your eyes in a map. So I'm curious to know how other people picture map, because I've been drawing like a map route, but it just looks like, you know, those murderers or like the crime scene investigators who have like strings all over, like that's what mine looks like right now. But that's I'm curious to see what other people think of when they hear map.
Yeah, me too. So far, this is what I did for about 2 seconds. So this is my top-down view. I realized, oh yeah, I went out of the house first, went up the stairs, and all that stuff that only comes after you're like, I went around, but then, oh right, I did all these other things. My idea of the map, is strongly, you know, influenced by what we're used to. So for the artwork, I was really trying to get out of that. I really did want to work with maps, but in a way that was a bit more collage, that had to do with integrating the physical, like the representation of that physical space with what I thought my representation, my view of it was. So that kind of merging was interesting to me, because I did think of like, oh, I could just make my own maps, which I sort of showed earlier with my masking tape sort of project. But it didn't turn out all that interesting, and I had originally planned to do a stained glass, like all the kids did their painting on the stained glass in the window, and I was gonna, and they used all like these tape to like delineate, and so that's what brought me to the idea of using tape and then sort of coloring that in. But I think I would only do that if I were to actually do a stained glass. I think that would make it a little bit stronger. So I was like, nah, I'm not going to learn stained glass in 3 weeks or less than. I'm not going to get all that stuff, invest in all that stuff for that. I'll do that maybe in the future. For now, I can stick with the things I've got on hand. Yeah. But yeah, I love your question where what do you think of first when map comes to mind? And I'd like to know like what people use maps for if you don't really use it in a wayfinding way. Like you might, of course, there's like a Google is great for the business aspect and knowing when things are open and that kind of thing. But yeah, just want to open it up. What do the maps look like? And, you know,
Who uses maps for treasure?
for treasure.
For treasure.
That's a good one. Treasure map, sure.
So for me, I was thinking like what Daniel was thinking, like I think that I'd like to pretend I'm imaginative when I hear the word map, but I probably am not. I probably just think of a map, but then when we start talking in this context, all of a sudden all these ideas come to mind. So I do believe, or like songs come to mind with the word map in it, but I think that's it. I think for me, honestly, I'm pretty rigid. I guess if I just heard someone say, hey, let's look at a map, I would think of map. When you talk about the art context or personal context, my mind opens up. But I don't know if this is talking too much, but I used to work for the city of Vancouver and the 311 phone line, and I'd look at like multiple computer systems and to deal with different departments and citizens calling in and helping out with department work. And a lot of times we'd have to like send the department. What I found was really interesting is when like you get somebody who has to fix a pothole or something in the city, you have to pick up garbage in the city. Like someone calls in and says, hey, there's a dead raccoon on this corner. And you could always write Oak and West 41st. You know, this is Vancouver, dead skunk or whatever it is. But the department, I don't know, I think because they have to get as many jobs as they do in a day, you have to be so specific with a citizen on the phone. Like someone go to Oak and 41st, you'll see it. But the guy in the truck or the person in the truck, they'll be like, no, like where exactly, like how many feet away from which curb, like the northwest curb, is it on the north side, the west side? Is it like by the sewer? Like you'd have to be so specific, things that you never thought about. So that was really interesting to me. And lots of times you would try to send even the department a screenshot. You'd open up Google Street View or the van maps, which we had Vancouver maps, send them just like a chunk to say this is exactly where it is, because if you didn't, they might actually not be able to pick up this item. They might just say like screw it and I gotta go, like I gotta pick up other garbage. So that's something from my experience. Bye.
That's very interesting. Yeah, like maps are extremely useful, and definitely I would agree with you that if you told me map, yeah, I would just think of maps, and I'm a big Google Maps user, especially in a new place. Like when we moved here, I don't think I went anywhere without it. And there was very hard to do wayfinding here in St. John's, coming from the grid of Ontario. Everyone keeps nodding, really exaggerating. And even my sense of north, which I thought was pretty strong, but it was really easy in Toronto. Like I was like, oh, I could even look and be like, oh, I'm north of the CN Tower. I know where I am, and or even the water I knew that was south, and you know, so with this, water surrounds us and everything's sort of at an angle on the map. So so my map making is like also a way to like just orient myself in somewhere new. So yeah, so the specificity, yeah, coming back to that. It's really helpful. Just sort of this, might be a tangent, but I was reading something about subjective maps and how map data can be used in different ways, and just sort of this person, I can't remember, but I was reading their sort of essay, and they were sort of mentioning that I think Verizon had this ad campaign that had to do with the United States map, and they had like such patchy service. They were saying Verizon's much better than AT&T or one of the two, and it just came from like, so they had that that map next to, I think, AT&T's regular map of coverage over the states. It was much better, obviously, on theirs, but much better looking. So they use the same data, but they use different data, different, I won't pretend to understand, but they just sort of use different ways of looking at that data to then draw their own map. And since it's the same data, it's the same map, you'd think it's pretty much going to be the same, but it does make a difference. And it influences politics as well. Like the US voting maps are often pretty skewed because it doesn't, a lot of the times population density isn't taken into account when they talk about like the states and the counties that are red or blue. So if it's like lots of red, but there's not a lot of people there, that doesn't show up in a map. So just this idea of maps being subjective kind of anyways, because we are subjective. We have biases and inherent, inherent biases.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to what James was saying when you were away for a moment, of just how we perceive things, but everything is more so, it's not us looking outwards, but everything is happening, like we bring our perception, well, you said it so much better. we bring ourselves to everything that we perceive, or another way to say it is that we project onto the things that we are perceiving. And so when we think of maps, which is supposed to be this objective kind of trail, and it's interesting because depending on what it's made for, but we still see it, but we can't escape the subjectivity. Like we still bring to us, or bring to it, us and all of the baggage and all of and then we read it wrong.
Charlotte, I feel like you've even done this before at work. You're like, I'll draw you a map. And it's like when someone takes a napkin and like draws you a map to something, and it's like, depending on your perception, it makes perfect sense to one person, and then nobody else in the world understands it. So I feel like any map can be like that. And like, I don't know, it's interesting to think about even the people who make standardized maps. How do they picture things versus how does everyone else see what they've made? Like even the maps you've made, Evelyn, it's like, we could be seeing something completely different than what you are creating. And it's one of those scary conversations where it's like, is my orange your orange and stuff like that, but we don't have to get into that.
No, I like that, yeah. I especially like that idea of somebody drawing you a map, because I've definitely had that happen at work, and I've been completely confused because they might think, oh, it's the intersection that's the most important, and I'm like, okay, but where's north south, like it could be any kind of which way. Yeah, it's funny.
I have a story about misreading a map, about misreading a pretty famous map, which was the London Tube map. And it was because, and I tell this story a lot as an introduction to something like a bigger project, but I was trying to figure out where to get off on my stop, and I knew that it was on the yellow line. I can't remember what it was called. And I couldn't find my stop anywhere on the yellow line because, or it was the pink line, because the pink line turned orange next to the yellow line. And it wasn't and someone had to like count out the stops for me, and it was just who the hell made this map? You know, you made this. I'm a intelligent intellectual person. I should be able to read a map, but it still fooled me, and I was offended.
Yeah, that one is really hard because it's a representation of the line, but not at all of the geography, especially the London map, which is like huge. But even the Toronto map, when I just first started,
Yeah,
little baby
subway maps are kind of like notoriously bad, just like in general.
Yeah, they want to fit everything in, and that makes sense because you can't have a huge sprawling map, but I think they should have both.
Or like the Go Train map. Oh
No.
that fucking spider thing. That's horrendous. It's not cute.
No.
Am I on?
Yeah.
We traveled last year and we were in Bordeaux in France, and you're going with your phone and this little map, right? And you're walking around and you come to this area where it's a circular kind of thing, but not really defined circle. It's like every 5 feet or 10 feet, maybe the width of those tall, narrow buildings, there's another street. And to talk about confusing, I thought, I said to my husband, I said, if anybody had to say, because there's something wrong with that lady, because I'd be walking and I'd get there and I'd check my map, that's not where, I didn't go that way, I gotta go there. But it was just too many, and I had all the time in the world, but I just didn't want to get too far away from where I was supposed to get to meet Alan an hour or so later. And it was just, talk about confusing. I know when it's on your phone, it's just too tiny, but there were just too many little streets coming in, and I was totally confused. I didn't get lost, but it was, I bet if anybody was watching, they thought it was comical. Too many little streets. Not enough space to map it out on your phone.
Yeah, I can't zoom in far enough.
No.
Guess not.
It's one of those no data maps, Evelyn. You know, the ones where you're just sort of, thank you, Google, for telling me which direction I'm going in.
Yeah. Beats paper.
Another thing I was thinking about was mind maps. Do you ever hear of mind maps? When you're in school, right?
Yeah.
If you plan it all out. So that's what comes to my mind sometimes too, because yeah, like if you had to write an application for something, or an essay, or you just sort of map it out. Write down some ideas first, and it takes you everywhere, right? That's the
bubbles.
Anyway, help you compose something and stuff.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, you know, what are we not representing that much in maps? You know, the hierarchies there of obviously wayfinding and streets, and then other maps have to do with other things. And earlier maps of St. John's, they're very, like, the historical ones have to do a lot with, from what I saw, military and just coordinating. And that makes sense because, you know, people who live there will probably know their way around. You know, you need it for a tactical reason, or, you know, and you have it, somebody do it, and so that means you've got money to spend to make, you know, to have it made. So yeah, the powers sort of that drive maps and what they look like, or what they used to look like, which used to look wild, amazing, wild. There was another interesting thing my brother told me about. It's a website called thetruesize.com, and it sort of shows you the warping that happens when we put our globe on a flat plane, and it really emphasizes everyone in the north, everyone in the south, but very much so like the colony, the colonists is, so it really like flattens the equator countries and really makes them look so small, but in reality, it allows you to juxtapose these two, or any kind of country. I can show this actually. I'll do this.
Yeah, send us a link.
Yeah, and I'll have it here on my computer. And
while you pull that up, Ev, it kind of reminds me of, I think I've seen this in TV shows and stuff, but a lot of people have explored just turning the map upside down and making the bottom north and the top south. And it doesn't require anything new in the way that we approach things. It just requires looking at the world upside down.
mm-hmm.
And it just freaks people out when they see that, because there's this underlying construction of like what is up and what is down, even though it's all constructed.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, Simran. Earlier, I had brought up these two maps of Newfoundland that were done in the, so I'm sharing this, but I think I can pull it back up again. Let's see. And it just talks like directly to what you're talking about here. So this is a map of Newfoundland, and you can notice that the south is up, which is a really confusing way to look at a map, of course, when we're used to the other way. But it's interesting because I think it is from the perspective of the mainland, which that's just my take on it. And how, like, if you're at the edge of the water looking across like that sort of strait, and then you're seeing the land, of course, it just makes sense to me to make that map in that way, that upside down way. Just like in my mind it makes sense, but as you said, like the world, there is no necessarily no up at all, in the sense of the earth.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see like how something so culturally constructed and perhaps arbitrary gives people so much comfort, and if you try to change it, they freak out. But it's not really rooted in anything.
No, yeah, and it's just familiarity.
Yeah, like, or when you try to like expose that, like there's like literally nothing stopping it from being put in a different perspective, and that it can still make sense. Like I know that like my dad will get really frustrated with me when I'm like, if I'm like trying to like turn on the hose or something like that, he'd be like righty tighty lefty loosey, but I'm like, but it's a circle. So it's like if I'm turning it right, it's turning left. And if I turn it left, it's eventually going to turn right because it's a circle. So it's like, if it's a sphere, north is going to be south at some point. But that's not right. Turn it right.
Yeah, so look at this map. It's pretty fun. So here's the US being overlapped on Europe, and then you bring it down to Brazil, and it's like dwarfs.
Mom, I don't think we're seeing what you're seeing.
Oh no, sharing is paused. Okay, bring your shared window to the front. I'm sorry, I'm new. I'll try this again.
That's okay.
Okay, this should work.
Yep.
Okay, so here's the US. Up north is huge. It gets comically large up here, right? And then when you come down, it's kind of small. And just Canada. So we, sort of, I don't know, it's a weird thing, but in my youth, I was, patriotic in a way that I was like, oh, we're second largest landmass in the world. That's amazing. It was so silly. But then, in perspective, you bring it down and then you're like, oh, yeah, there's not much. Sorry, this map is, I'm just trying to work it. But yeah, just how it's, just as small of a landmass really that in a lot of places.
Maps
Anyhow.
like that. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Like maps like that make me so uncomfortable because it makes me realize how big everything is.
Yeah.
Like if it takes 12 hours to drive across Newfoundland, like the world is huge and I don't like it.
Yeah, it's funny. And it's and to think of like maybe places that you've never been being like huge, ginormous, and you don't really think about them as much. Your world is really, you can only be one place at a time and go so far. So yeah, that I can understand that, like the true size. And then you go into like the Earth and then the moon and just the solar system, and then it gets really crazy. Then you can't really fathom it. Mm-hmm. I haven't been really paying attention to this side chat, but maybe I'll catch up. Does anybody want like a refresh on the prompt if interested?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So for the prompt, I was thinking, so think about a route that you walk, and it can be any route, and then think about the sights and sounds, colors that you might encounter or that you have encountered, and then just sort of make something through that. Draw a map of your walk, and you can try and include as much or as little as you like, but just sort of try and remember that walk and go through it, and trying to represent in writing or in drawings what that might look like. I'll show mine so far. Just I'm not embarrassed. Yep. So there was a car that was for sale. So that's a top-down view of a car with the red. It was a nice looking car. And then there was some guys under a car also that were working on it, and I felt like it was really smelly. So did these clouds. Yeah, you can't really get the colors, but that's what I've started. If anybody wants to show their own. Oh, hey, Zachary. That's my brother there, the long hair.
Is anybody else working on one? I did one.
Oh,
Yeah,
get to see.
I worked on one briefly. I've been pretty involved in the conversation. Oh, Mary Kate, I'll show yours, Mary Kate. Can you show yours again?
Mine is my walk to the car and then to school, because I'm a teacher, so I was setting up my classroom today. So you can guess what part was me setting up my classroom. And then and then the black line is me returning home and driving and yeah, just getting back home. All of the zigzags are me going upstairs, the memorable stairs, at least. There's totally more stairs I walked on but forgot about. And the swirls are driving or sitting down. And then this was kind of fun just to like reflect on my sense of direction, because I have an awful sense of direction. Whenever I'm inside somewhere, I'm always like, okay, that landmark's over there, that landmark's over there. And then I'll go outside and be like, I had it backwards. So it's like, I think I rely heavily on feeling over logic when it comes to figuring out where I am. So I think this is an apt representation.
I love that. I love the idea of the movement in one place, like as in a car. That's really fun. I like that a lot. James, did you have something?
Yeah. Sorry, I think Wayne had an altercation with his car, so I'm hearing about that from the second story of this house. But yeah, so I did this. I don't know. it's supposed to be this way, but I don't know if that really can fit. And so I don't know, when you told me about the prompt and you were like, I'm like, it doesn't have to be like an outdoors. Doesn't have to be an outdoors. I was like, oh, okay, because I don't know, I don't really get up to too much leaving the house, especially as of late. But especially when we're talking about like place and memory. So like recently, a few months ago, my grandmother passed away, and my uncle has been really like pushing, although, I mean, lo and behold, they weren't really able to put it on the market anyways, but he was really pushing to get the house on the market. So within a couple weeks of her passing, like the entire house was like completely gutted. And I have like such a strong like connection to that house. And so I sort of drew this like map with like sort of I guess like the black is represents like very like physical landmarks of the house, with the stuff in pink being like other landmarks in the house, but like things that like maybe are sort of tucked behind the corners, or things that have like more stories behind them. So with like this living room, I drew this little like coffee table that has like these cupboard doors, and we would keep this like old, I think it was like a Pampers baby wipes container, but it was like filled with like crayons and like Crayolas. So like when my grandma used to babysit me, like I would just like sort of pull up the paper and draw with these crayons, and that would be like stowed away in that cubby. Or, you know, while we were collecting things, my mom told me about this story where my grandfather was fixing this chair, and then as he was closing up the upholstery, he like dropped his hammer in there and then like stapled the upholstery. So there was just a hammer in the chair. So she like made it sure that her sibling, she was like, I want the hammer in the chair. And so it was like me, my dad, and my brother, we were like ripping apart this chair, but there was no hammer in there. And she was so upset. She was like, oh, he must have taken it. He must have needed a hammer and then just decided to take it out. But she was like, I wanted the hammer in the chair. And I actually hadn't even heard that story until that point. So yeah, it's just sort of like lots of like little monuments, lots of like little odes to all of like the terrible, awful decor furniture choices, but like it was just like so impeccably what it was that like I have nothing but reverence for just like how absolutely garbage it was, which is part of also the reason why I was super upset at the idea of like no longer having access to this space. But yeah, so just lots of little doodles and lots of little arrows that like lead to not very many sensible places. And to speak to what Simra was talking about, I drew a lot of these staircases upside down because there's no linear perspective in this map.
I really like that about making your own maps, because you're not concerned about accuracy, and especially in this context, you're concerned about your own feelings and everything. So really the map, the like path you take, is kind of just a way to remember those things.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I teach storyboards too, and that like oftentimes like my students will be like, well, how do you make a storyboard? And I'm like, okay, well there's like two minds to it, because it's like, for instance, if you're like working with like a really expansive team, you're gonna need it to be like clear in a way that like if you're away, or if like somebody's trying to do their job, they have to like be able to be like, oh, okay, like I see this frame, I know exactly what I need to do. But like if you're an independent artist and you're working by yourself, a lot of times like you can make like the most like chicken scratch, nonsensical, non-linear, non-framed storyboards, but like you can decipher it because it's an archive of your process. So it's like, it doesn't matter. It's like the same thing with what Daniel said about like the napkin map. It's like, I'm filling it in with my mind. So it's like these 3 lines will mean absolutely nothing to you, but like I know that there's like an infinite amount of like pixels in between them that I can pick up on just by seeing the 3 lines.
That reminds me of, often I'll be drawing or doing something, especially going on the walks with the story on, or I know my mom does this all the time. I'll have a story or a podcast, and often if I remember, or I'll go past, I'll have this weird feeling like marriage, as I'm walking by, like, what? Oh, and that's a connection my brain made, like, to do with what I was listening to, and then the place itself. Often it will be work, like artwork, but it's funny, it doesn't stay that long. It kind of it goes away in your memory. It's not forever linked with this random conversation you overheard. But yeah, I like that, the like connection.
Isn't that the best though, when you're like looking over your notes and you read marriage?
Yeah.
You're like, what the fuck was I on? Like, what? Excuse me.
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
Does it help you still like remember things?
What, writing down marriage?
No. No, when you look at your notes and you go,
sometimes. It's also kind of like with that kind of phenomenon where like you write down a word and then like you look back at it and you're like, what is that? Actually, with me, more of the times, like, what is the word? Because I can't physically read it. I'm like, I don't know what I wrote here. But it's the same thing when it's like you're like trying to like remember, like you're like remember like a word, for instance, and you're like, I don't know, I know it, and then like 3 weeks Tuesday, you're like, marriage. Oh. And then you have like, yeah, and you do that thing on the bus and everyone like looks at you and you're like, piss off, I'm thinking about marriage.
Yeah. And then the headphones pop off.
Oh, like more than that. Headphones pop off, you drop your books, like you throw your backpack across your glass of wine, you throw it on the floor and it shatters everywhere. And people were already like, why are you holding a glass of wine? Like, this is the bus.
Yeah.
And you're like, how dare you? And you just throw the bus. Yeah. And then you get kicked off of the bus and then your stuff is like chucked out and like thrown at you. And
they kick you off the bus for that? That's so unfair.
I mean, I get kicked off the bus just for getting on.
I think the wine might have been the only other than the tantrum. What were we talking about?
We were showing our maps. Does anyone else have maps to show?
Yeah, that's a great segue.
I need to go in a minute. My map is like, again, very like top down, just like lines. Like, I try to picture it. There's a walk I did maybe like 1,000 times back home, where it's like I walk down the hill, down Water Street, and then depending on my mood, I can do the little loop, which is like I just go up one street and then go back home, or I can do like the big loop and like go a little bit further and come back. But it's funny because like I do that walk a million times. I could probably close my eyes and do it. But I find I remember so many specific memories from different walks or different times I've taken that walk, and they're always like a little bit different because sometimes I take my time, sometimes I'm just like powering through because I just want to go for a walk. So yeah, I like just picturing it as like a top down layers and layers of all the walks I've taken rather than just like one specific route, which is cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Mine's really embarrassing. Oh, sorry.
I'll go for it. I'd love to see yours.
It's I have the composition all wrong. But this is my old walk from work or to work, where my house should have been like up here, really, because I realized kind of when I was making this that I feel when I start the walk, as soon as I step out of my house at the time, I would see Signal Hill right in front of me, and then as soon as I got to work, I'd see Signal Hill again. So it was this weird, but closing by return bookmark or bookends. But anyway, so everything felt really small when I walked out the door, and then when I would continue the walk down, I walked past 3 churches and what's that building called? The courthouse. And then I would pass these big chunks of architecture, and then I'd be on Harbor Drive where everything's kind of short and stubby again. And I just kind of remembered, I realized even though I looked at all these churches, I had trouble, and maybe it's just me in my memory, I had trouble remembering the order and what even the shapes of it, but I could remember the windows, oddly enough. And so here's my first view of Signal Hill. Here's my the house cat stuck on the roof, because that happened a lot. Here's the rooms, the first church, and then the second church. Here's not a church, but a apartment complex. You said I forgot a whole church, and then this big blocky courthouse, and then Harbor Drive. There's a boat, and then my final view of Signal Hill. But I would like to actually flesh this out, because I like this idea of it being small and then big and then small again.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you start with it and end with it, and it's both places.
Yeah.
And so, like, you can like write a little legend that says like asterisk memories not to scale.
That's good. Yeah, memories not to scale, and other things, but mostly, but scale for sure.
What other things? Oh, what
Memory not to accuracy.
Oh, what's your memory doing?
Now we've gone back to James and I just having a chat. Like, this is what it devolves into.
And much worse, to be honest.
Did any of you, when you start doing your math, do you find that very shortly you're out of paper?
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you start again?
No.
Or did you just scribble over it?
I started again, but it was even worse the second time.
Yeah.
No, I just scribbled over it.
You just scribbled over it?
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
Me
Oh, you
too.
connected it like through the negative space?
Me too.
This way. I am so upset right now. I've never been more upset in my life.
Oh, Mom.
Mine is very boring, but it's the route that, like somebody just said, you have a choice between going this way or that way, depending on your mood. Was it Nicole? Daniel?
That
Maybe?
was Daniel. Yeah, he just stepped
Yeah.
out.
So anyway, so if I start from the house and I go down the street, when I'm making my way to a trail. And when I get to a trail, there's an area that starts off. This is that's Yonge Street, but in Aurora, same one that goes down through Toronto. But anyway, there's a little trail here, and it starts up in really, really tall trees, high forested area. And this curvy little meandering part is very swampy. If it's after a big rain, you wouldn't take this route because you'd get soaked. And this meadowland always reminds me of Avondale in Newfoundland. When I was the smells. It's a meadowland. It's a forest, and it opens up to this meadowland, and especially after rain, is damp, grassy, earthy, and it just takes my breath away. It brings tears to my eyes every time. Just doesn't change. And then as you carry on, you go up through up another hill and through, and then you're out of the trail and you're in a neighborhood for a little bit. Then you come into the trail again in this pond. Evelyn and Mary Kate know this route. And then I always stop and say, okay, what can I see today? Will I see a heron? Will I see a duck? Sometimes you see those little muskrat things swimming in the water. And then the rest is trail, cross a few neighborhood streets once in a while until you come out to the neighborhood and you walk back. That's the part I hate the most, right? It's funny. There's no other way to do it. I shouldn't say that. Sometimes I turn around and I go back the same way. But to do that loop, my husband wants to do the loop. He always wants to loop. Lately, I have convinced him, let's turn around and walk back, because when it's so hot and you're walking on the street, it's not pleasant, right? It's just, you're running from one little umbrella of tree to the next, trying to get into shade. But when it's another world when you're on the trail, because it's so forested or woodlandy and meadowy, and you can't believe that you're in a town. Anyway, that's when I said we're like a hamster on a treadmill. That's our treadmill. You could change it up if you want, but for some reason, creature of habits. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I like how you visually described the boring part. It's like, and it's not like that, right? Like it is kind of like that.
That's like,
but
get me
I
home.
like, just
Quick.
get down there. But I like how you meander and you go around.
That's right. So all of the street parts are straight, and then when you're in there, you're just
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be straight, you don't, you know, but it's like maybe it's the feeling of.
We're very fortunate to have it in our town. And like, Brittany, Evelyn said earlier about listening to stories. I listen to audiobooks lots of times. So even though it's my husband and I, we never say a word. I got him hooked on audiobooks. He's listened to his book and I'm listening to mine. And I have to tell you one thing. A couple of weeks ago, it was the 22nd of August, our anniversary. We left, it was an hour and a half walk from my neighbor's house. My friend, not my neighbor, my friend. So we were at their place. We left around 10 at night and we were walking. And they were shocked. What, you're walking this hour? They're like, oh my gosh, we can drive. No, you can't drive. You can't get in anybody's car anymore. No, we planned this. We're walking. And walking home, you stick to the main routes because it's going to be shorter. So we were walking up Yonge Street at 10:30, 11 at night. Hardly any traffic. This was a Saturday night. And it was just so, I saw things that I never saw before, because when you go through that part of town, you're in your car and you're just concentrating on getting through that area. There are houses, Evelyn, right in off the road, house on Yonge Street, not like a business. So anyway, it was quite a feeling. And then when you came across the little pubs that had the outdoor patios and the little twinkling lights and people out laughing and having a drink, you could have been in Europe. You could have been anywhere. It was just, and I never experienced that feeling before in Aurora. Never. It's like, oh, Aurora, it's just a boring little town. But at night, when it's COVID and it's quieter and there's not a lot of happening, it was just a different vibe to it, right? Anyway, that's it. I won't talk anymore.
Yeah. Does anybody else have sort of that? I think we're nearing the end, I know, but I like that sort of things are different. And is there anything that like you noticed in terms of the vibe that really, that was like a positive thing? Like, for instance, I don't know if this is positive. I just go back on my own thing. But I noticed at the beginning there was a lot less air travel. I just didn't notice, like every now and then you'd hear the airplane. You'd be like, oh, there's an airplane. It's kind of weird, but reminded me of that a book called Station 11. Just sort of you know it, yeah.
I read that book, yeah.
Yeah, I read it a while ago, and then I thought of it as soon as this happened. I was like, "Ooh,
Nice map."
is that
Hey,
Zach?"
Ev, does it remind you of a place?
Sorry?
Does this remind you of anything?
Is that reminds me of somewhere in St. John's.
It's in Aurora.
Okay, well then.
Well, I like that because it looks like kind of like a ravine with
Bingo.
water.
Where did we have a ravine, Ev?
Well, I guess Jones Court.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's mental. That's
But
my
it looks
mental
like
image.
a lot.
Creek.
Pardon?
That's my mental image 3-minute drawing of the creek.
Awesome.
That's my mind maps.
From Jones Court.
That's our home, like our young. What do you?
That was
call
my
it?
childhood stomping grounds from like ages 4 to 8. We used to play in that creek. We used to run into that tunnel and go into the sewers and run through the other side of the street and stuff. Yeah, it was great.
I wasn't with you. Oh.
No.
I was too young.
Does anyone else have a map to show?
I was going to say, we must be related because my map is not only childhood, but is also of Avondale, which is kind of funny that you both just showed 2 maps that were included Avondale and childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll show you my map if you can see it. It's kind of hard to see maybe. So it's got where we start out at the cabin and where it goes down to the lookout and then where we would play house. So it was all in the rocks where all the places. So this is like the map I wish I had made when I was a kid. And then all the important berry places, like where there's blueberries up the hill, partridge berries, raspberries, can't tell if you can see what I'm seeing, and blueberries. And
Yeah,
then there's down the train tracks to go to the swimming place and where you could go up the trail for horses and follow the rapids. So And I noticed that in memory of all these places from my childhood, obviously food, foraging for food was very important to us.
Awesome. I can picture it. And I love the way you did the railroads like that. Cause yeah, that's, yes, I can picture it. And
well, and I can't remember who was saying about their map not to scale, because there's those pieces of the train tracks that in your memory are, you know, it's not a very big piece, but probably going to look at it now as an adult, it's probably either way smaller or actually larger than you remember, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm so glad people made maps. Awesome.
Brittany, show us your map. But you have to
Brittany,
be on.
let's
You have to unmute yourself first, though.
Your audio might not be connected.
Oh no.
Charades.
We'll laugh
Yeah.
for her.
Yeah, I can't hear you still.
You could still show us your map, though.
Okay. Brittany says, so mine is very simple. And mine was very complex, Britt. So, you know, you've a lot to look into. I'm a barista at my current job, and I have to make travels to a very cold freezer, like a very cold. The map starts at the top left with a coffee cup. To the bottom right with a box, the dreaded freezer. Can you show it closer? Oh, wow. What is that, the steps? I like how you drew the steps. Awesome. And how many times do you have to do that? Stairs are disentangled because there are like 40. 3 times a week. It sucks. And it's Toronto, so those stairs.
In the summer, though, the freezer might not be that bad. No. So bad.
Remember in the heat wave, Evelyn, you were interviewed by the Air Banner because you worked in the freezer.
Yes.
The coolest girl in town.
I wish that was the headline, but no.
How was that not the headline?
I wasn't the star.
Who authorized?
They're obviously not as, creative in their writing. Brittany says, I had made a tangled mess in the freezer to symbolize my brain in the moment. Okay. I thought maybe it was you spinning around and just like looking for stuff, but yeah, like that. No.
Okay. Well, it's 8:38 at least where I am, and unless anyone had does anyone have any other maps they want to show off?
I'd love to see more.
Well, you can always email us your maps and we can share it around. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. This was so nice.
Yeah.
It's so nice just to hear about your work and then try something new and then think about my walk to work differently.
Where's
sure.
that?
Yeah, that's my background.
Oh no, they're coming for you.
They're coming for me. I gotta go.
Time's up. You're over.
Thanks everybody for coming in, and thanks Eastern Edge and everyone for participating, and I loved our discussion, and yeah, it was an honor. Thank you.
Nice seeing everybody.
Yeah, nice seeing you all and nice meeting all these new faces. Please come back to our events. I would love to see you guys again.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, Heidi.
Bye.
Hi.